Welcome to my session. This is Stella Mobile, A to Z. You're in the right place. I was surprised anybody showed up here because of everything else that's going on. But this is a client success story. My name is Teresa Mokwa, and I work for, or with, or I am Profile Developers, and my husband Thomas is right here. He is the other half of Profile Developers. So we work out of the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania area, and I have been working with FileMaker since version 8.5, so since about 2007, a 15-year anniversary recently.
Please.
I've been working in FileMaker for a while. So here's we're going to start with some backstory for the app. So this is a Go app, and it's the client that we've been working with for several years now, I think 5 or 6 years it's coming up on. And we took their original program that the owner of the business had built himself from, I think, FileMaker 1 or 2. And he had been working on it for decades, and it has supported his business. Their business is PERS systems, so personal emergency response units. So they sell and maintain the equipment, they install it, and they also have a monitoring center. That's their business. And so Stella is a program that we built onto their system, right? We took what they had, built it out. They needed to improve invoicing and prepare to do electronic claims processing. They were coming up to a point where a big insurer in the region was like, well, if we want to work with you, you have to be able to do electronic claims. And they had no way to do that. So we started with that. And currently, Stella manages clients, contracts, equipment, stock, service calls, pricing, invoicing, payments, and a whole bunch of other stuff, right? So Stella is a big system. And then there's Stella Mobile. Stella Mobile is an iPad app that they had known from the start they wanted to have, right? Because they have technicians that go out in the field, they're installing equipment, servicing equipment, and they've been doing that for decades as well. But it was all on paper, right? So the owner who had built the system and had been working on it, his son is now the COO. And he basically grew up with FileMaker, grew up with this business, knew exactly what, has this vision for where he wants the business to go. And so he knew right off the bat, when you're done with that, we need an iPad app. So we started out by wireframing to replicate their paper process and improve their data capture. Their original, what we call, and I'll talk about it in a second, it's a daily tech report. Their daily tech report was a single piece of paper that the tech took with them that had the client's name, address, the piece of equipment that was installing, and a single line for notes. And so they were like, we need to improve this. So we said, okay, we can do that. So we created the wireframes for the workflow that they described to us, and we used Balsamic for the wireframes. And what's going to be coming up in a few slides is we're going to have the side-by-sides of the wireframes and then the app screens, just so I can give you an overview of what the whole app does. And then I'm going to do a little bit of a deep dive into how we package the data from the big system to get it into the mobile system and then back again. Okay? So, right. Requirements and challenges. So some of the requirements that we were working towards was to get away from the paper-based process, right? They had multiple technicians assigned to multiple stops each day. They wanted the technicians' notes and the client data updates to be added to the main system after review automatically, right? And the client data updates are really the most important part. Those are things, like I said, they're doing emergency response, devices. So if the emergency responder phone number changes. They need to know that from the first time they, talk to the client. They get all of their information. They get their medical conditions and whatnot. When the installer goes into the home to put the piece of equipment in, they need to follow up on that profile, make sure all the information is right. So that was the most important thing. All of those updates, any changes, any errors had to come back into the main system. The next item on the list, creating service activity records for the service calls. Those are things like, they actually called them, somebody answered, or there was no answer. So things like that for performance reviews in the future. And then at the end of the day, they need to be able to easily see the changes in the data. So again, that, this phone number changed from this to this emergency contact was removed. That's all they cared about. They didn't care if anything stayed the same. Some of the challenges were that there was no guaranteed connection. So it had to be an offline system. We couldn't just, build a new layout for the service call and just look at that inside our main system. They needed the ability to easily add or update the client information on the fly. They needed to be able to change out the equipment that was with the tech on the fly. And they needed the service call status to be updated as they were completed. So out on the road, when stop 1 is completed, they wanted that to pop up in the system so that they could then process it immediately. And if it needed to be rescheduled, they could put that in the queue for customer service to call that person up and try to reschedule with them. So here are some of our wireframes. So again, I'm just going to kind of go over these to give you that overview, and then I'll be doing a little bit of a deep dive into some pieces of it. So standard main menu. We've got the Open Daily Tech Report. If you remember earlier, I said their tech report was just a list of stops on a single sheet of paper. So we're using the same terminology, but we have a button to open that, a button to call home, essentially, call the home office, view any notes they made, look at their inventory, and then in the bottom right, there's a sync button that they would use at the end of the day to just make sure everything gets sent back home. And then in the upper left is a latency test that we built in so that they can make sure that there was a strong enough signal where they were to send the data up. This is what the Daily Tech Report looks like on the iPad app. So we've got the tech information at the top, the date with how many stops. For each of those lines, like the S, the P, and the I, that visually represents if it's a service call, pickup, or an install. They've got the, what the action is. The account number is the piece of equipment. The default is the type of equipment. And then that status at the end will change whether or not it's been completed or needs rescheduled. So they've got a view inventory, reviewing sub-reports, which we'll talk about in a minute. They can switch between Google Maps or Apple Maps, and then that's another call home button to call their monitoring center. This one is the service called detail. So we've got more, regular stop information at the top after you tap into one. It's confirmed. We've got some more detail there. It keeps flashing. The service note area, that's another piece that they, desperately needed their iPads to have, is a history of the calls that this client has made, or their interactions with that client. And so they would put the most important information there at the top, and then a little bit of their note history. We've got any phone numbers that they need to call. You can just tap to call those. There's an address and a way to tap to navigate. Those check boxes are the service call checklist items that I talked about earlier. And then another call office button. There's also areas in here for rescheduling and the entry photos, because they needed something like, oh, you show up at the house, no one's there. Take a picture of the front door with the note that you left saying, hey, we were here, sorry we missed you. This one is the sub-report. The larger section of notes, and that's a web viewer with all the notes loaded in from the big system. And so they can scroll through there and add to it as needed. At the bottom, they can add a note there. This is the appointment review section, and this is where they would change out any equipment if necessary. But there's also, you see those little kind of triangles there for alerts. They have to mark that the equipment tested okay. They have to put in a note or a resolution. They have to put in a photo, one or more photos, or say that photos weren't necessary. So that's what those are indicating. And then this one, this is where we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive. This is the client information section. So everything any information that's related to the client is shown here, and the tech can tap into each one and change it if necessary, and then kind of go on their way. But they should be going through the whole list, verify that all the information is correct, and then they keep going. This is standard signature capture, a couple of check boxes. Then we've got their inventory, which is pretty cut and dried. And the last, or second to last, there's a checklist area where they can say that they did all of these things. They're supposed to leave a copy of the contract. They're supposed to leave a business card. Check those off. That's another thing for the in the main system for them to say at their performance review. Looks like you do everything that you're supposed to do. You're checking off all the boxes. And then here we have just a photo gallery layout for them to take one or more pictures of equipment that's been installed. All right, so that's the overview. So how to build something like that. So this is kind of the fun part, right? Because as FileMaker developers, we all know there's 500 ways to build an app like that, right? But you want to try to get one of the best 5. So we spent a lot of time trying to, just thinking about the best way to do this. Because there's so many different options. So we knew one thing that we didn't want to do was we didn't want to rebuild the structure that we have in the big system, right? So this is our service call TOG, and we can see that it's related to a lot of things. All right, we've got resident data, we've got technician data, contract information, and this is part of the service call detail in the program in Big Stella. So, like I said here, client address, household information, things like number of pets, number of vehicles, medical information, which is allergies, medical conditions, the emergency responders list, items on the contract, the equipment they have, payer information, and the technician and all that stuff. So that's a lot, right? That's a lot of information spread across a lot of different tables. And then if we take a step up from that, we have a collection of service calls. So the service call list, which is, as you can see, we've got Matt as the technician, and then, sorry, these dates are old. I did screenshots. So we've got 2 dates and all of the stops for those dates. And this is, how they would navigate this. So it starts out as a set of confirmed stops that are assigned to the technician on the particular day. And that's our daily tech report we were talking about before. That wasn't just a piece of paper. And the tech managers prep the stop order beforehand, and then they click a button. And before we had the iPad app complete, they were clicking a button and it would print out a big pile of paper, right? So they'd still have their piece of paper with the service calls on it. They'd have their stack of contracts that need to be signed, hard copy, to go out on the road. But now we have another button that what it does is it bundles all of the service call information and bundles that DTR information into a record that can get downloaded to the iPad. And they can download it as soon as it's available. So this is a far nicer, smaller, more friendly structure for our iPad app. So we built some new tables for the mobile system in Big Stella, right? So we've got 6 tables here that support the iPad app, which is a single file out on the road. So the first one there is the mobile underscore app. We distribute the app from within the bigger system. So we have a table for that. The DTR, which is the tech plus date. Then the mobile image. These are signatures and any photos that are coming from the iPads and coming up. I have an inbox table so that all of the images get sent to the inbox, and then the inbox unbundles them. So it'll handle images. It'll also handle any inventory or sets of inventory that the tech has. So at the end of the day, they can push up what they have on hand as a JSON object, and then the inbox takes it apart and updates information in Stella. There's a message table, which we still aren't using, so it still has 0 records. But the idea there was, okay, I want to be able to send a message down to the tech, and we just didn't move on that yet. But the structure's there. And then we've got the mobile service call. So that is where all the action's going to go. So here we have some comparisons. So the structure of Stella on the server, wide and deep. Got 89 tables in there. There's multiple files. The data is historic versus Stella Mobile, which is more compact. It only has 17 tables. So it's not, I mean, it wasn't going for flat by any means, but it's a lot less than 89. Single file, and the data is temporary. So everything, there's like there's master data. That's the blue. That's highlighted there. That master data stays on the iPad at all times. So that's like the master equipment list. There's the equipment checklist items stay there, and then value list items, which are things like, we have a language value list that pops up later, when we're maintaining data or editing data. And those records are stored in their own table to be called with the virtual value list technique. So we've got the blue tables that stay on the iPad and don't get wiped. The settings table also doesn't get wiped because that holds the, there's like a hub ID so that it knows which set of text to choose from, and it has a tech ID, so it knows whose daily tech report that it needs to go up and get, whose service calls am I going to get. The regular data, everything that's in green, all of that stuff gets wiped out at the end of the day because we don't need it anymore. Once it's popped up, we say, oh, yep, the server's got it. We can wipe it all out. So everything's temporary. Utility tables, kind of standard, syslog, globals. The virtual value lists, we're using that virtual list table. And then the last 2 are add-ons that we're using, what's my latency, and the Z IoT spinner reporters, which is what we use for progress windows or progress bars while people are waiting for things to download. So I want to go back to one of those requirements. So at the end of the day, they want to be able to easily see the changes in the data. And again, it's the client data in particular that we'll look at. But in order to easily be able to compare and parse the data that the technicians are adding or updating, we decided to use a 2-field system for each collection of data values. Right? This allows us to isolate the changes when parsing the data. And we're using 2 fields and the JSON format in order to do this. Okay. So this is our mobile service call table, right? So the 2 that are highlighted, JSON_client, JSON_client_edit, are the 2 we're going to focus on. And you'll notice that there's a couple pairs, right? So there's a JSON service update, JSON subreport update. JSON CLI, JSON CLI edit. So we've got a couple different pairs in there. So the field JSON client is going to hold any data related to the customer, the name, the address, the medical conditions, allergies, responder information, hospital, doctor, vehicles, pets. And most of these are coming from different tables, right? So, the name, that's going to be in the resume. But their address is in a separate table. Their medical conditions are related. Their responders are, if they have 4 different responders, they're in their own table. The hospital and doctor, they're all spread out all over the place. But we put them all into this one field. And then the JSON client edit is always empty to start. So to build the JSON data, we built some special layouts. And by special, I just mean extra. Because anytime you're doing anything where you're like, we need to go to this one place and do this one special thing, you want to have a set of special layouts for that. So we're using a super, super, super simple script and just moving field by field and building the data for the JSON, right? So we just use go to next and then use get active layout object name for the key and get active field contents for the value. And, as we go through, we're just building it. And you'll see in a second. It'll make more sense in a second. But one of the beauties of this is that if they decide tomorrow that they want to add some whole big new module and now they want to track X, Y, and Z related to the client that needs to be updated, we just have to add the fields to this layout and name them, and they're going to show up in the JSON client field tomorrow. So easy peasy. So this is the script that is building that client JSON field. So all it's doing is from the service call itself, goes over to the resident table, which is the layout that we just saw. Go to object start, which is the first one, and just go to next, go to next, go to next, grab the name, grab the value, grab the name, grab the value. If half of them are empty, got a bunch of keys with no values. But it gets every piece of information that's on there. And so this, again, this is the same one from last time, but the key for that field that's highlighted is name first, and the value is whatever the value is. So again, pretty easy conceptually, right? That make sense? Good. But so the nice thing about this, and I don't know if you guys can read some of that stuff on the edge there. Again, the ID field at the top is just named start, so that in the script it says, oh, go to start. And then the first field at the bottom, which is like the housekeeping fields, created by, stuff like that. The first one is named end, so you just need to shove them down, put any new fields in between, name them. You have to jump into the tab order and make sure that the end is really at the end. But other than that, everything's just going to pop up. So again, to recap, we're leveraging JSON to compare and parse the changes in the data. We knew we needed an easy way to compare the data additions and changes. We created those 2 fields. One field is preloaded with all of the data values from Stella, and the other one is empty, and it waits for data edits from the mobile app. All right? And I've got 2 more slides to feed this in, and then we'll be done with talking about the JSON structure. So, for example, client JSON loads with the default original data. It never changes in the mobile service call record, which is very important because one of the things that we have on the iPad side is when you're editing data, let's say they go in and they change the first name and then they change it again and then they change it again. And they're like, oh, I just want to restart. There's a reset. Reset will just say, oh, go get the original and toss it back in. So you always have that. It's an automatic backup to have that in there. And then the client JSON edit always starts as empty And it will always change if the original data is incorrect or needs to be updated, or it can just stay empty. If there's no changes, that will also stay the same. But like in this situation, if in Big Stella, name first was Gary, but it's really Jerry, it's all the edit field's going to have is just that change, right? It's not going to try to rebuild all of the, it's not going to go get all the keys, right? It only has the ones that are changed. Okay, so the next part here is how should we display this, right? Because again, we've got a million options, right? So what we've used is button bar objects to display JSON items that are just need to be displayed. And then we're using virtual list technique in order to row a bunch of them. That client data page that I showed earlier, that one's using the virtual list technique. So again, super, super easy calculation here. So this let statement is always saying, so this is one that will display, the first name and the last name on a button. So we've got original first, says go get the name first object from JSON_client. Same thing for last name. And then we've got two variables there for edit first and edit last. So it's doing the same thing. Get me the key name first from the edit field. And then two case statements. First one, if edit first has a length and it's not a question mark, then use edit first, otherwise original first, and then the same exact thing for the last name, right? So we have this everywhere anytime we need to display that JSON data, right? So it's always saying, hey, if the edit's empty, just use the original. For virtual list, does everybody here know what virtual list is? Pretty much? Everyone used it?
Yeah.
It's fun. I love it. I use it everywhere. So the big caveat with that is you can't use it on top of itself. You have to keep that in mind. But so with virtual list technique, just in case someone out there doesn't know, it's using double dollar variables as your columns, and then the field name there is a calculation, just grabbing one of the rows of that column. So super fun, super easy. Everybody should use it. Another example of how you can think about virtual list if you haven't really delved into it is that you're literally building these columns of data. They can say, have anything you want in them, and can come from anywhere. So super, super flexible. All right, so that layout that we saw earlier, so on the right in browsement, so we've got those stops at the top, and those are all calculated from the calculate button bars. So it's saying, oh, go get me the action from the service call, go get me the type from the service call, give me the date. So super easy for that one. And then in the body, that's all virtual list. So we're using the virtual list body to view the client data. And there are a bunch of things piled up there, if you can tell. We've got, column 03, column 03, column 05, and a bunch of stuff just kind of stacked on top. But it looks nice and clean when you actually view it in browser. This is the same layout, but it's a different presentation of the data. It's just a different sort on the virtual list. So it's saying, use the, this section instead of the other section. But what we're seeing is the different data types, essentially. But you can do this type of thing like a list tap to expand, and then it'll resort the virtual records and show them as you want. And again, this is what it looks like with absolutely nothing in it. And we use hide object when, everybody's favorite thing, to hide the stacked buttons conditionally. Every virtual list record has a data type. Right now, we only use data and header, right? So header is the blue, and then the data is the white. So this is our little script snippet to build the VL display. This is the only part of the app that I want to rewrite a little bit and add another layer in, because if you see there, so it says proceed to build the provider information initial header. So each line is actually hard coded in this script for how it's supposed to show up. But what I want to do is add another layer to it so that somebody could say, oh, no, I want to change the order and just, move them around. And then it'll refer to that before it builds out all of these lines. But each of these, so this master, the parent script, runs these little subscripts depending on the type of data. So that first one there, build initial subsum label. And we send our script parameters in JSON format and take it apart in the subscript. So we've got, for that first one, you can see in our square brackets label, this is how we do our script naming. So if we're going to send a parameter, we put the name of the parameter in the square brackets, and then the same name is what we use in the JSON. And then you'll see in the subscript that we take that out and build that into a variable. So we've got label, provider information. And then the next line, it's a different script, build keybar for VL. We're sending two script parameters, the key and the label. In this case, the key is payer ID, the label is provider. And then we see those are the first two lines, right? So that first one, it's a header. And so that's the sub summary. And it's called provider information. That was the label we sent. And then the next one, label was provider. And then the value is that's the payer ID in the JSON that was sent. Okay. And this is our subscript. Again, very simple stuff, straightforward. This script does a couple things. So the first thing it does is, I guess the first thing it does is it makes variables, that for the one above that, the create vars from keys, that says, oh, whatever the script parameter, the name that's in there, that label, turn that into a variable with the value that came with it. So that's a handy thing we do. The next thing it does is it checks for the added data in the edit. So again, we're doing the same thing we did with the calculated button bars, right? We're saying, hey, set the original, set the edit. Then here, is there something in edit? Is it valid? Yes. Then use it, otherwise use the original. And then the next step on there, that line 11, where we're substituting out any returns for some of the data that we are looking at and editing. Some of it is return delimited because it's coming from the parent system, and it's like from value lists or checkboxes and things like that. So we substitute those out so that we can see them in a line instead of in a paragraph. And then the bottom chunk is building the virtual list, right? So every record in there has the $double ID service, so it knows what service call that we are looking for when we're jumping from page to page, that we know which service call we're looking at, what the type is. So in this particular script, we're building just the var for VL, not the subsummary. So that's data instead of header. And then we've got the label. So in the case of the last one, it was provider. And then the label's provider, the key was payer ID. And then the value that we pulled from the JSON client field. The last two, the verified, the tech's supposed to be verifying everything, and then they're like, that's too many checkboxes, so we're ignoring that. And then the last one is the section. So as we jump around from household information to the responder list to the client information, those are our different sections. So it knows what chunk of data to find. Okay. So how the heck do they edit this data now that it's in the app and it's in a bunch, it's in the virtual list, right? So we're using global fields to do that piece. So in our list there, we have two different row types. It's either data or header. If you hit a header, it doesn't do anything. If you hit a row of type data, it loads the value into a global field so that you can edit it in new card windows. And we have several different styles of card windows that that go with the type of data that's being edited, right? So this one is an image. Then we also have some for value list up there at the top, and then the bottom, that's a web viewer and just a text field for a multi-line. Then there's another one that's for a single line, and I think that's it, just standard text values. We have a checkbox set one also. So we had to have multiple card windows for the different types of data so that it would present in a normal way for you to be up. So there was a lot of programming in there just to say, if the type is photo, then use this. And then also on saving them, having them saved properly in the right place. If you notice those buttons at the bottom where we've got revert, cancel, and save, that revert button is the one where I talked about earlier, where if you were like, you know what, I don't remember, let's start over, you can hit that. It just wipes out the value that's in the JSON client edit field and then pulls in the original. Okay. Now part 4 is getting the data back home. All right, so they're on the iPad, updated all their phone numbers, they've gotten, crossed their T's, dotted their I's, got their signatures. So how are we going to get the stuff back home? So we have a sync that runs after every service call, right? So when they're done with the service call, when they mark it complete or they mark it that it needs to be rescheduled, the script runs that calls home. We use the FileMaker Data API to send the updated mobile service call fields and image data in separate loops. We upload the timestamps into Stella for the DTR and the service call. Our images are sent as raw base64 to that inbox table. And then after the image sync loop runs, we do a remote call to run a script on the server to unpack all of the image, the base64, so that if somebody needs to review the service call, which is the next step, all those images are unpacked. So once everything's back, we have a compare report. So this is another thing that is built with Virtual List. So we are now at the review stage. So once a stop is uploaded into Stella, a team member reviews the information. So somebody like the manager for the technicians. We use the Virtual List to display the data, and only the new or changed values are displayed. If the JSON client edit field is empty, we don't see anything. If it's not, we'll show the original and the edit values per key. So this is kind of a closer view of the client update section of this report. So if there were no changes for the client updates, it would just say no changes. Okay. But we've got a bunch of stuff that changed here, additional allergies. They also wanted to see, of course, if there was no data before, you need to have that show up. So you're going from nothing, add living room as the equipment location, add, Shirley has the key across the hall. So, but this will only show if there's data in that JSON client edit field. And so one of the cool things that I was really happy with is that we can use the same technique that we use to build the data to update it on the way back. We're just doing it backwards. So we use the same layout and the very similar script. Instead of saying, oh, go to next field, it just says, oh, go to field name first. Change the value. So it's just looping through the values that were in the edit field. So 2 things changed. It goes to 2 fields, updates them, done. So I was very happy with the turnout with that technique. It really worked out for us. And again, you add fields to this layout. They are going to get added into that JSON field. They will automatically get, so there's no extra programming to this once we did it the first time.
Right.
So I was happy. So then the last thing that I want to talk about is integrating Clara Studio. So, and this is something that we're still working through because, of course, we started working with Clara Studio and started building some forms, and then they were like, "Oh, hey, here, do these 50 other things first," and handed us a bunch of tasks. So since we started, Clara Studio has changed a whole bunch. So I'm very excited at taking advantage of the new techniques, the new technology that's available in Clara Studio. With this satisfaction surveys, as well as some other things, we'll use Clara Studio to have people request for service calls, things like that, have the technician come to them. But yeah, the anonymous connections is going to be a game changer for this business. So right now, satisfaction surveys, what they do is they're already in the big system, right? And what they do now is they have to, so they have an activity that pops up that says, oh, hey, did you do the satisfaction survey for this client? And then customer service has to call and then call and call because nobody answers their phone anymore. So, they're always going after people for some feedback. And what we'll be able to do when we fully implement Clara Studio is that we'll be able to grab an email or any mobile phone numbers we have. We'll be able to send an email or a text message to the client that'll have the URL that they can hit and take them to the form, right? So records are going to be pushed to the studio table, which generates the link to the existing Clara Studio form. So one of the things we have set up now is to manage the forms. For every form that we're going to use, we'll have a new record in our studio form table. And then that will use a code to link to that star customer satisfaction 01. That is Clara Studio. So that's the table over there. So we're going to line those up with the code so we can see, oh, show me all of the records that are over in Clara Studio. You'll see from in FileMaker, look over into Clara Studio that way. And then from the resident point of view, we have their email address cached, or phone, we'll probably have 2 for that. And then using either the email or the phone link, be able to see those surveys from that point of view. So 2 ways for us to see into the Clara Studio information. So what we have here was just what I was talking about a second ago. That form ID links the submission to the form. The email links the submissions to the client. And that will give us visibility and allow for survey creation via the resident record. So we will be able to, from the resident, their installation's complete, and we can automatically then push the record over into the Clara Studio table and then have that trigger. We haven't figured out yet how we want to do that. We'll probably use Claris Connect to have it send either, we'll probably put some timing around it, server script, to send those URLs out, send those communications out, so then people can follow up that way. So these are some of the add-ons and techniques we used. So what's my latency? Spinner for borders, virtual list, virtual value list, and that JSON create vars from keys, which we use in every script everywhere. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions about anything? I talked too fast. But
I'm sorry, I came in late, so I probably missed it. How many users out in the fields with their iPads is this deployed to?
Right now, it's only about 10.
Okay.
But they are looking to expand, and I'm hoping, hopefully, they'll have people in multiple cities soon. So they're very, very happy.
How big is bulk data?
You mean the big system?
Yeah.
And how big? How? Like how?
Gigabyte.
Oh, what is that? You know? Off the top of my head, I am not sure.
Okay.
But it's because they don't store a lot of documents, and the images that we grab we aren't grabbing like super high quality images. So, but I know the backups are probably so.
So are you handling versions at all for this? Like, how are you improving on this app and deploying updates to the iPads?
So as we make changes, I have old versions, kind of just local. And then as we make changes, we make sure we comment that out in the file itself. And when we distribute out of the main app. So I have lots of send emails with all of the old iPad versions as well. But as we improve, we're just trying to keep a lot of notes and just kind of keep on top of that. Yes.
Do you have any like last chance sync being implemented? I've done something similar to this, but a big problem that we ran into was, they're offline because they're in a place where they can't get internet, and they get back to home base or whatever, but they're not obviously completing the thing anymore.
Right.
So there's no trigger to sync again, and then they're really tired and they want to go home, and they set the phone or the iPad down, and then we refresh everything tomorrow and it's gone.
Right.
So I wonder how you overcame that challenge.
Yeah, so we do have on the main menu, there's a sync button in the lower right corner, and they have to do an end of day sync.
Right.
So, and it doesn't have to be at the end of the day. They usually do it, a lot of them do it at 8:55 the next morning, and then they hit the delete data, and then they download, Tuesday's tech report. So we do have that they can't delete if they haven't uploaded. So that's like one stop. So we just kind of thought through those scenarios to try to get ahead of them.
Probably kind of a user timestamp comparison to see what's the last sync of the user, and if you haven't synced later than the last one that you have on the system.
That it would like check to see. Yeah, so I think what I have, I know that, I remember correctly, that if they've downloaded it already, something like that, so they've downloaded the DTR for the day, they can't download it again unless we wipe out the data. Like they do have a way to clear it themselves, because I didn't want, especially when we started out, didn't want them to be hamstrung. You got someone who's at home with their iPad and they can't download and they can't clear that in order to get a clean system. So I wanted to make sure that they had all those tools. They just have to know to not hit the delete all data button in the middle of the day, so that's just a training thing. At this point, we probably could hide that until they're done with all of their stops. But yeah, we do have some kind of stops in place so that they can step on themselves and step on the data. Yes.
Have you dealt with a situation where someone updates, say, a customer information in the main database while a technician is out in the field and may have also made a change?
Yeah, we have not, at least they haven't told me that that happened. They are really, really good internally about communicating with each other. So if there's somebody out on a service call for something, they might put it on a Post-it note rather than update the system. I don't know for sure, but I do know that if they're looking at a resident record, they can see what service calls are due. They could see that somebody is, that it's scheduled for today. So they would have that information to say, oh, I should wait versus updating it. No, but I'm not sure. Yes.
I was going to ask that same question, and then I thought about like your process, and actually, it's like you're not actually pushing the whole record back. You're only pushing back the fields that change. So in theory, like somebody on the main system could change like a notes field,
Mm-hmm.
and if somebody changed the last name, they actually both win.
Right. Yeah. It's not going to overwrite something. The change would be if somebody called in to say, "Oh no, you spelled my name wrong," and then they managed to both get it wrong. Like, you know,
Yeah.
and then one of the wrong ones would win. So, so yeah, we don't have anything built in for that kind of conflict where this one was, the original was downloaded at 8 a.m. and then the original was then updated at noon, and then it was also updated at 1. Like, we don't have that built in, but if they needed it, we're in that direction.
Does that also mean that you don't have to worry about like a sync that fails partway through because you can resync and just assume that the data you're pushing is always going to be accurate?
Mm-hmm.
Or okay.
Yeah. So if a sync were to fail, which it hasn't happened yet, the data API. So we use that latency. Go back here. The what's my latency?
Yeah.
So the button that we have. So there's the button on the main menu where the tech can just hit it to say, oh, well, what's my latency right now? What's my connection speed? I doubt they're doing that throughout the day. We are running that at the beginning of every sync process anyway. So that just automatically pops up. It checks. It says, I'm sure it's annoying to the techs, but pops up, checks. It says, yay or nay. And because there are some times where they are out in the middle of nowhere. And also at the beginning of rollout, there was a tech who his iPad was messed up and it just it was not connecting on anything other than a Wi-Fi. So he would be out all day long and his stops weren't updating until he got home and updated at the end of the day. So, but that's how we were handling that. So it'll run the latency. If it's not favorable, it says try later. And that's that. But yeah, we've never had a half sync. And one of the things that we do kind of to that end is we don't push a lot of the images at the same time that we're doing the service calls complete. We're just sending up the text data and the signature. So, and signatures are real light in terms of size. So we send those two up, and any other images are saved for the end of day sync when they're probably going to be home on Wi-Fi anyway. Any other questions? Yes.
Kind of the opposite question to the one I asked earlier. Do you have like a safeguard in place for like beginning of the day to make sure the sync is current? Like if I was sick today and you changed data yesterday, but I forget to sync this morning, is there like a way to guard it against that?
Yeah. So so when you start up, if there's nothing on it, or if there's a DTR that's on there that's old and hasn't been synced, it has a red bar at the top that says this data needs to be synced. If you miss a day, then it's just a matter. The way that they work, you can't download yesterday's tech report today. because there is no yesterday's tech report when it's today. So if you didn't go out yesterday, they are going to change the date in the system anyway. So that's how that would work. But they'd usually give all of your work to somebody else and reassign everything, and then kind of start over from there. Oh. Yes. No. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.